Greetings all. My name is Hal Harvey, and I'm delighted to welcome our two guests for this section of the Global Philanthropy Forum. Raj Shah is the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and Andrew Steer is the president or CEO of World Resources Institute. The title of our session right now is Build Back Better, which is certainly something we need to do. I'm in California, where we are suffering smoky skies. Partly as a result of climate change. Our guests today have extraordinary, really unmatched experience in making real world things happen. Both of them have deep backgrounds in philanthropy, but also have worked in international development for decades. Raj Shah ran USAID under the Obama administration. Andrew ran DFID, the British bilateral aid agency. And they have extensive programs in their current positions all over the world. So we're in for a rich conversation. Just a word about Build Back Better. There are these inflection points in countries' histories where they make choices that last for decades or even hundreds of years. In the United States, we've had the Bonneville Power Administration, the rural electrification, the interstate highway system under Eisenhower, a series of huge national choices that created our current character. And the world's in for a bunch of these right now, as Europe gears up for $1 trillion stimulus bill, as China is writing its 14th five-year plan, and as the United States sporadically and episodically makes its way towards some serious commitments as well. So there are opportunities just in those three examples, but certainly beyond that around the world to take this moment and do something really seriously important with it. I've asked our two fantastic speakers to focus especially on real world change at scale. So to make sure that we do not squander this moment, that we don't spend it on what I would call decorative policies, but instead get to the heart of the matter. We're gonna keep this rat-a-tat speed style. Lots of Q&A, and I'd ask the audience to submit questions in your chat as well. But let me begin with you, Andrew. What's at stake here? What are the choices that we're confronted with as we proceed?
Well, the stakes are extremely high, and thank you, Hal, and thanks so much for the forum for bringing together these interesting ideas. And welcome to everybody. It's a privilege to be here. The stakes are extremely high. I mean, we now know, for example, on climate change, that unless we really get serious this decade, it's sort of game over. The stakes are unbelievably high. At the same time, you know, we have the worst crisis that we've had both in health and in economics for the last 100 years. And that's made us all realize that actually we're not as safe as we thought. We're much more vulnerable than we thought, and we need to do something about it. We can't rely on our governments the way we thought we could to protect us. At the same time, we've got between 10 and $20 trillion of public money that will be used to reboot the world economy. And obviously, it would be terribly sad if we use that money to rebuild yesterday's economy. We need to build tomorrow's economy. And here's the point. It would be tempting for philanthropists to think, my goodness me, with 10 to $20 trillion at stake, I mean, what could we do? I mean, we have maybe millions, but not trillions. And I guess what I would like to discuss today is how relatively small amounts of funding, not too small, but relatively small amounts, can have an unbelievable leverage effect. And that's what we should be talking about.
Well, let's make that our charge. Let me ask a question for each of you. I'll start with you, Andrew, since you posed the question, then turn to Raj. Can you give a tangible example of where such a focused investment could have incredible leverage?
Oh, I mean, where to begin? On the energy side, you know, we now know that that money is waiting on the sidelines. That's kind of work that Raj is doing, for example. We're missing the pieces in the middle. It makes full economic sense, But quite frankly, a country like Vietnam or a country like Indonesia still has so many vested interests. We need to demonstrate the economics and the finance. That can't be done outside of grant financing, and to demonstrate that actually the economy in the 2020s, the economy in the 2030s will be better if we do it a new way.
Yep. Raj, how would you jump in on that question?
Well, Hal, thank you for having me, and Andrew, it's great to be with you as always. The work that both of you do is so important, so I'm just thrilled to be here. You know, at the Rockefeller Foundation, we just believe we are, as you point out, in this extraordinary inflection point. I've had the great opportunity to dedicate much of my professional career to the fight against global poverty, and I feel like we've been watching 1 billion people come out of poverty over the last decades. The World Bank now estimates that 500 million will be pushed back into poverty over the course of the next decade due to COVID-19. And you know, I think you could make a similar statement about gender equity and equality, about racial disparity, about macroeconomic capacity to provide fiscal and stimulus policy support, and ultimately about climate change and its impacts. The COVID has unmasked a massive amount of inequity in the world, and it is exacerbating it. So the question is, what can we do? And I'm with Andrew. I think we need large-scale public-private partnerships that are actionable, big, and that inspire some hope in the future. I feel fortunate that this past November I got to be in Bihar, India, before we stopped traveling, and actually helped launch a partnership between Rockefeller and Tata Power to build 10,000 rural mini grids. These are solar installations with battery backup. They use artificial intelligence for remote management, smart meters to charge rural customers. And we've now been serving about 500,000 people. This will help us together serve 10 million people and bring them productive, reliable electricity so they can be productive, create jobs, have jobs, change their communities, and do it all in an entirely clean format. That's one example. We need thousands, millions of those types of examples at that type of scale. The good news is, if you look all in on what that requires, the bulk of the financing for that is entirely commercial. Some of it required a lot of philanthropic support years ago, and some of it requires some government subsidy today. But it's a true mix of capital to get those kinds of outcomes. And I suspect, and I know, Hal, this has been your calling, I suspect that we have to build those kinds of partnerships by better informed policy responses to the COVID recovery.
Yep. You didn't mention the word, but you're discussing a leapfrog development strategy. Somebody who's getting their first phone would never string copper wire to make it used and this is now happening in the energy space. So if it's done well, and if one follows learning curves, there's the possibility of a snowball effect. And so you're creating the first few rolls of the snowball. I'm not sure that's the apt analogy for India, but let's go with it. What are the other leapfrog opportunities that we have? Back to the theme of Build Back Better, where can we collectively, as philanthropists, but also citizens of this world, envision skipping some of the dirty stages of development?
Well, I'll jump in, and I'm sure Andrew can add to this. I mean, I think energy infrastructure is the big obvious one. Yeah. And frankly, we also know that sort of green and distributed renewable energy is probably our best hope now to reach the 2 billion people who live without access to reliable, productive power. 800 million without any real access to power, and 1.2 billion with power, but it's not reliable enough to sort of grow your community and build economic viability. So I think distributed renewable energy storage, all that goes with that is one example. I think we see it in healthcare, where we see, predictive modeling and app-based tools and artificial intelligence-based diagnostics, allowing community health workers who are reaching very poor and vulnerable communities, and often are women and preferentially reach women and mothers. All of a sudden, they now can be empowered with tools and technology and knowledge and behavior change practices that can have far more impact than what we've seen in the past, and gives us a chance to ensure that in the future, 6 million kids don't die of simple diseases, and people are protected from infectious disease threats like COVID-19. I think in food, we see something very similar. There is absolutely no need for people that are just coming up the protein curve now to fall prey to a food system that is entirely industrial, packed with added fats, sugars, and oils, and deeply unhealthy, and frankly, the number one driver of chronic disease, especially diabetes and cardiovascular disease for much of the industrial world. The Rockefeller Foundation just completed a Food Systems Vision Prize where we highlighted multi-stakeholder visions of agricultural systems that are actually far more nutritious and far more sustainable simultaneously. And we just can't afford to repeat big industrial food systems that are both deeply unhealthy and horrible for the environment and for our climate. So you can go across every industry, I suspect, and illustrate these. The challenge, of course, is what Andrew mentioned, is if the world approaches a recovery with the willingness to make investments in these new strategies, we can build back better. If we in fact do what we've always done, which is tempting and which frankly still dominates the current response, especially in a fragmented environment where people don't like working together anymore, we're going to have a really bad outcome.
Yeah, for certain. Andrew, I'm going to ask you the same question, but first, Raj, with this systemic mapping you've done on healthcare, are there places for other philanthropies to plug in? Would they benefit or be able to use your work?
Well, absolutely. Rockefeller, early on in the spring, we sort of advocated for an aggressive testing strategy and said that we needed, that COVID was going to be with us for several years, even with vaccines at the level of efficacy of the major candidate vaccines. And so the only way to kind of avoid large scale shutdowns, which are deeply debilitating, especially to vulnerable people and women and girls, or to have lots of deaths, is to test in a cheap, fast, reliable manner. We're starting to see those tests come online, these antigen screening tests, rapid PCR tests, pooling of PCR testing, and a host of other technologies, lateral flow assay tests that can be done at home without needing advanced equipment. Those tools and technologies should be made available in particular to vulnerable communities in America and all around the world. And we are actually partnering with the Skoll Foundation to accelerate access to those solutions in the United States. And I'm really grateful for Jeff's strong leadership on pandemics for many years. We could use so many other philanthropic collaborators, and we would welcome people reaching out to us. We're working in the United States, we're working in India, where in states like Maharashtra, the testing positivity rate has just exceeded 20%. We're working in parts of Latin America and parts of Africa, throughout Africa, really, on these types of solutions. And we need more philanthropic partners for sure.
That's great. Andrew, back to you. Examples of leapfrog development strategies that you think philanthropy could help stimulate?
Well, first, Raj, I must say, listening to you, I hope everybody realizes you are a leading health expert, because, it's fascinating listening, as well as a leading agricultural expert. So there are lots of ways in which modern technology leapfrogs, using, big data and so on, all kinds of information systems. Organizations like ours do a lot of remote sensing. We can now see basically every tree in the world as it falls almost. That means you can do things that you couldn't before, and you can hold each other accountable. So there's huge sort of technological advance. But I'd like to also mention a different kind of building back better. A different kind of technology is really doing things differently. It's skating to where the puck will be, not where it is. So for example, even simple things like the way we design our cities. Our cities for the last 100 years have been designed actually for automobiles, not for people. And if you look at some of the older European cities, we now are able to figure that were built, if you like, designed before the automobile. Turns out they're more efficient than Houston, Texas, for example, or Beijing, which have been designed after that. So what we could do, you think of Africa, it's going to have the biggest urbanization in the history of the world in the next 20 years, decisions made in the next 20 years will affect Africa's future for the next 300 years. And so it's a very small window of opportunity. There is a much better way. Investing in public transport is actually cheaper. It's more human, it's greener, it's healthier, it's more equal, it creates more jobs than building another ring road, another flyover, and people back. So that's an example, if you like, of it's not a new technology, bicycle paths and so on. And so too, I mean, just to support what Raj was saying, a totally different area, food, for example. Mm-hmm. If the emerging world starts eating beef and lamb the way that the rich world does, there will be no Amazon left, and we will have lost the battle of climate change. If all the cattle in the world got together and formed a nation, they would be now the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases, just about equal to the United States. That's how damaging beef consumption and production is. We're not asking everyone to be a vegetarian. So what's the new technology? The new technology is actually moving towards a more plant-rich diet that is healthier. It would, for China, for example, they're very interested in this because it would save them billions of dollars in healthcare. And for all of us, it would give us healthier lives. That's another example, if you like, of a new technology. And if the emerging countries could leapfrog to where we now need to go, which is a more plant-rich diet, there you go.
So I want to stick with this urban planning question for a second, because I agree with you. There's this old saying, early footsteps cast long shadows. In fact, I learned that from one of your predecessors at the Rockefeller Foundation 30 years ago. The layout of a city determines its energy patterns, its consumption patterns, but also its livability, whether kids can walk to a park, whether people can walk at all, or they have to be in a car. It creates a dividing line between those in cars and outside of cars. Can you tell me how a foundation would support an urban plan for a growing African city? Who can do that work? Who's set up to do that work? How do you enter into that? It seems impossible. On the other hand, if you do it, the leverage is profound.
Well, one of the exciting things is there's a new generation of mayors around the world. There are organizations, as you know, like C40 and ICLEI that are designed in order to move things in a greener direction. But here's what's missing, and there are expert groups that can do it, including, and by the way, what Raj is doing and what some of the rest of us are doing. There are expert groups that actually are being demanded now by mayors and by national governments to say, hey, there is a better way. I mean, after 10,000 years of civilization, is sitting in an automobile for 3 hours a day in Mexico City, is that the highest we can achieve? And if you're poor, you have to change buses 4 times. You have to get up, you leave your house before your children even get up in the morning, and you get back after it. Why? Because it takes so long. Is this the best we can do? And around the world, you've now got these mayors saying, no, actually, we can do better. And citizens are saying better. And we know how to do it. But here's the thing, it takes quite a lot of planning, and it also takes a huge amount of consultation with citizens. This requires that citizens understand the options. It really is possible in the political lifetime of a 2-term mayor to turn a city around, have more green spaces, more compact, more connected, more resilient. Rockefeller's done an amazing job on resilience, for example. It is possible to turn it around, but it is not possible to do it on the very meager budgets of an overworked city government. And so absolutely, I mean, dollar for dollar, this has a huge payoff.
What you're talking about is getting into the DNA of the city and adjusting it before it's too late.
And like so many things that both of you have written about and talked about, it's about a matter of the heart. It's about what do citizens aspire to? And for heaven's sake, I mean, we've not been heading in the right direction, have we?
So one of the diseases that political leaders fall prey to is doing more of tomorrow what they did yesterday, because it's easy. And it's certainly easier to, if you're trying to do a rapid economic recovery, it's certainly easier to give money to existing industries than new ones, right? And so one sees this in Vietnam, where they're planning 40 new coal-fired power plants. But my favorite words when I speak with international leaders contemplating such investments are stranded costs. Who's going to be left holding the bag when coal is no longer economical, which already is not economical where it's exposed to market forces. The United States, you do not want to be owning a coal plant or a coal mine, nor in Europe. So Raj, let me turn to you. What's the way around this instinctive push or instinctive direction of yesterday's industries? And how do we make the non-status quo industries prosper and let the stranded costs wither away?
Collective action. I mean, I think the answer to that question is concerted, collective, multi-stakeholder action. You could have made the same statement about the vaccine industry in 1999 and the collective action of the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization over 20 years and over tens of billions of dollars transformed the human face of vaccination on this planet. You could have said the same thing about the HIV crisis in Africa in 2003 and 2004. Again, collective action changed the nature of it. A lot of times you need collective action because you just flat out need scale in order to drive down costs and make supply chains robust. For our efforts to bring renewable solar mini grids to the world's billion people who live in the dark, we need lots of low-cost batteries. We need the right technical infrastructure, the right smart metering technology. Those industries are not going to develop and supply a consumer-facing industry that's doing 500 mini grids in one state in India. You need scale. You need scale to get the kind of solutions to work, and you only get that with concerted action. So I'd say my biggest fear right now is not that smart people like Andrew and yourselves and others don't have brilliant ideas for how to build back better. It's that we don't have a politics right now that enables and calls for bold collective action. And that is really what we need at this level in order to recover in a way that has some sense of equity and justice and fairness and forward-looking behavior embedded in every part of society. And so, you asked the question earlier, what can philanthropy do? The answer is not pay for it, because, no philanthropy, even the biggest, have the resources to do that. But if we can inspire partnership, if we can inspire collective action, if we can take some risk out of the equation, if we can get people at the table together and saying, no matter what your politics or your backgrounds are, or the industry you represent, can you be part of trying to, put your thumb on the scale of justice in this moment, then we will have done, something worthwhile. And I think we try to take that mindset and approach in our work. I know Andrew and you all do as well. And we just need to keep pushing away on that basic concept of we're all in this together.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And to give an example you mentioned Vietnam, for example, how we've got to sort of look for political opportunities. So you're right. I mean, Vietnam it generates electricity. EVN is a state-owned company. Vina Coal is a state-owned coal company. The financial system is also used to doing exactly the same thing. The data are growing that actually it doesn't make any sense. How do you break that? Just having a conversation with Ministry of Finance, like I used to do when I worked for the World Bank, is good to do, but it's not enough. So here's what you do. And this is where philanthropy is doing this right now with our help and others. So what would change the mind of the Vietnamese policymakers? Well, it turns out that actually they really, really want modern industry around Ho Chi Minh. That's their Silicon Valley. And who's in Silicon Valley? All of the Silicon Valley companies from California and from India, they're all gathered around there. All of those companies actually are starting to make commitments on their own climate change to reduce their own. So they need renewable energy. So what does a philanthropy do? And it's Raj, you're involved in this, I know, and others like the SIF are involved in this. What you do is you then try and get these guys together from Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley of Ho Chi Minh City, and you say, okay, you can help have the discussion with the government. You can help actually demand electrons that are renewable and don't come from coal. then you start changing the entire calculus that the government makes. And the Minister of Finance says, actually, we do need to support this. And so you do. And that's an example of exactly what Raj is saying, which is collective action. There are no silver bullets when it comes to issues like climate change. It's a jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces need to come down together. The private sector will almost always be needed. Government sector will. Philanthropy is an absolutely essential piece of the jigsaw puzzle.
Let me mention an interesting example I just ran across. So there's a man, Bill Wheel, who purchased all of Google's clean energy, $10 billion worth. And then he purchased all of Facebook's. He worked for them for a while. What he's doing now, he started something called Climate Voice. And the idea is to get the employees of the tech companies to demand that their companies not only buy green energy, but they take a policy position, a strong policy position on the future of this earth. And the employees have tremendous leverage with the tech companies because they're hard to recruit and they're hard to train, and you want to keep them happy. And it's the right thing to do. So there may be an aborting force. It's a brand new group, dribs and drabs of money just to start it up. This would be a place where small philanthropy could kick off a really substantial new force, and we need that force, to your points. So let me ask one more question. I also like to open this up for audience questions. We've only got about 5 minutes left, but can you give an instance when you were at DFID or USAID when a philanthropy influenced your spending in a significant way?
Oh yes, and actually, Raj is guilty for this in part because of what DFID, which is a British agency, did was massively influenced by philanthropy, which was pushing the new what was called International Finance Facility for Immunization, which Raj, I think you probably get more credit for than anybody else. An amazing technique, a financial technique to raise money to address the problem today, because if you address it today, immunization, you won't have the problem tomorrow. So that was one. And then what's called Gavi, which is again about immunization, radically changed the way we operated. And I'll give you one more example. DFID put, I think, $1 million under the influence of other philanthropies into something called Safaricom, which was a telecommunications company in Kenya. They had this crazy little idea, which was no one thought would work, but we did, called M-Pesa. As a result of that now, hundreds of millions of Africans bypass the banking system, and they're doing financial transactions on their mobile phones. That's an example of $1 million influenced by philanthropy, and then leading to this incredible. Yes, so please engage. By the way, that was true what I said, Raj, right? You deserve all that credit, I hope.
Well, I had a lot of collaborators, but I think the basic point that a group of people could come together, they almost by definition had to be outside of the system to propose the immunization finance facility that we constructed together. And Gordon Brown was chancellor at the time. I think he and Shriti Vadera had as much to do with inspiring us to think big about what's possible as anything else. But I guess the point I'd make, Hal, is that innovation, whether in financial innovation to reshape the global vaccine market and immunize millions of kids, technological innovations to bring digital banking and money transfers to people who didn't have real participation in the cash economy in Kenya, as Andrew just highlighted, basic core biological and agricultural science innovations that have led to hundreds of new hybrid seeds being introduced across Africa by the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. And today, the core innovation, kind of 12 years in the makings, that we could provide off-grid energy in a clean way to people who don't have it at 15, 20 cents a kilowatt hour, down from maybe 85 cents a kilowatt hour, and do that in a manner that unlocks economic productivity in addition to just household consumption benefits. and does it without involvement from governments and utilities. Like those are the kinds of innovations that I think philanthropy, when it's at its best, takes years of risk to put out there.
Yep.
And then to make it accessible to everyone, you have to have a real willingness to partner in these big collaborative engagements that represent collective action. And I would just ask your listeners here to think that way, and to recognize that we are in this inflection point, that the next 18 months will define whether we lose or continue to make progress on decades of fight in terms of addressing extreme poverty around the world, and will be fundamentally determinative as to whether we protect our climate from an existential threat to all of us. And so now's the time. If you're listening and you're interested in philanthropy, you want to be a part of these things, give us a call. But frankly, now is the moment to act. It's not saving up to be around 30 years from now. It is right now.
I could not have offered a better summary. I agree completely. I'd really like to thank both of you. Extraordinarily insightful comments and amazing work you have and continue to do. Much appreciated. So thank you for that. I have a quick logistics note. The next and last session of the day is called Amplifying Diversity and Youth Voices, and it will take place after a short break at 12:10 p.m. Pacific time. So again, Raj, Andrew, many, many thanks, and look forward to more opportunities together.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.